more mechanics doesn't always mean a better game, or better combat, to be more precisely. Now, the recent success of Monster Hunter World really showed the industry how well traditional fighting game mechanics can be implemented into a third-person hack and slash, which has been done before, but not to the level of Monster Hunter. Now, Monster Hunter is a great game, with many reviewers saying that the combat system is the best ever made to this date, which is fair enough. It is a great combat system, but I can't help but disagree to this point. However, I do agree to that, more mechanics does mean a ton more depth and nuances to the game, and it just adds that much more variety that can come from anywhere really, and really does expand the amount of ways you can play a game. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's better. It's not exponential, as the increase in mechanics doesn't mean better game. A common comparison that has been made is Monster Hunter to Dark Souls. Now, Dark Souls, when looking at it, is a very limited move set you can normally do. Normally, just typically your R1s and your R2s, whereas in Monster Hunter you have all these range of mechanics, all these combos you can pull off, all this depth to each specific weapon. But I still feel like, people sort of like just look at that on face value and say, alright then, Monster Hunter is a better combat system, which is just not how it goes. They're both good in their own unique ways. They play completely different, and I don't think it is comparable, their combat system. And you cannot say one is better than the other. They're both great in separate, unique ways. To me, this is the equivalent of saying, without thinking, Rainbow Six Siege has better combat than CSGO. And that is completely subjective when you really think about it, because Rainbow Six Siege does essentially have more mechanics than CSGO. But they play completely different. They may be first-person shooters, tactical based and competitive, but the combat systems are completely different. CSGO focuses more on aim, reaction speed, and sort of a fast-paced gaming experience, which on the contrary, Siege is a more slow, methodical game, which has got a bit more planning, looking through your drones, and sort of knowing where your opponent is at all times, sort of trying to manipulate the map. There's just all these different ways to go about it, rather than just being sheer down to your aim and reaction speed and the speed of the game. But you can't really say one is better than the other, and this is why I feel like saying games like Dark Souls or games like Monster Hunter World is having the best combat system to date is invalid. It is really hard to compare games realistically. We do it all the time. I do it all the time because it's easy. But at their core, games can be so varied, so different. When looking at Dark Souls compared to Monster Hunter, there's a complete different experience. Monster Hunter is like a 40-minute boss fight, sometimes 20 minutes, too longer. And you don't get that same sort of suspense and blood pumping adrenaline as Dark Souls, because Dark Souls focuses on a more fast, streamlined, learning the enemy's attacks and how to dodge them. Whereas Monster Hunter is like Siege, a bit more slow and methodical, thinking it out, finding the weaknesses of the enemy, what's it gonna do, Whereas in that you feel like you're punished less, which would make sense, because if you were heavily punished in that game, they would need to balance it out quite well, because you don't want to be playing for 30 minutes and lose all your progress, which happens quite a few times. Another great example why more game mechanics definitely doesn't mean better game is Dark Souls. We can look at Dark Souls, and From Software just straight up removed one of the integral mechanics to Dark Souls to make Bloodborne one of the most loved games ever, and one of best games in the Souls franchise. Arguably the best. Dark Souls 1, it's between them. They are really great games. And what did Bloodborne do? It removed shields to create a faster game than it already is. Because when they remove that mechanic, there's no blocking behind the shield. You have to move forward. It's a completely different game in removing a mechanic. And it creates an experience where some players might not enjoy Dark Souls or not being able to get into Dark Souls. And Bloodborne was that gateway to getting into it with that more fast pace rather than hiding behind the shield with a boring sort of playstyle. Which I know myself because Bloodborne was my first game that I properly completed out of the Soulsborne franchise, and I've never looked back. Also, if you're to compare the two games, they've kind of got two different focuses if you look at it. Monster Hunter has a learning curve more about learning yourself and how to use your weapons. The weapons you have came to love that you will continuously use. The same combos, you know, that bond with your weapon. Whereas Dark Souls, it gives you the base mechanics so you can master them, where what changes in the fights are the bosses. You need to learn the bosses because bosses are so unique, varied, and different speeds, different attacks, which arguably Monster Hunter World does as well. But Dark Souls can sort of take that to the max because it's really just base in its mechanics. It doesn't have to build its bosses around like big combos not being efficient on certain bosses. It doesn't create that balance issue. It knows what it's creating it for. And that is why these games are so different. Now, I've just mainly used these two games as examples because it's a bit more recent and it's just been something on my mind for a while. You know, you could also use this comparison for like a game like Doom and, I don't know, Homefront the Revolution. Doom is fairly basic, but it creates an amazing game with fast-paced combat that's just so, you know, it gives you that adrenaline rush, which is incredible. And now, in conclusion, I've got to say that it's completely silly to consider one game the ultimate combat system. I respect your opinion if you think it's a great combat system, but, you know, there's a line. And it's like that for so many things in the gaming industry. So many things can be compared, but there's never going to be one best of everything. There's personal biases, personal bests, that's all completely fine. You know, you can have a personal favourite combat system, but when it's subjectively looking at something, it becomes a whole different thing. Okay, that's gonna round it up for there. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I had this on my chest for quite a bit, and I felt like this was the perfect thing to do so. I can't appreciate you enough if you have watched up to here. I really do enjoy talking about game design and all this. This was more a moan about this comparison between the two games, and just remember, right, more game mechanics don't mean a greater game. That's the moral of the story. A great game is a great game because there's so many things, and it doesn't need to be oversaturated with game mechanics to make it great. Also do want to say, I love every game I've mentioned tonight pretty much. The only game that I mentioned that I've not played is Homefront the Revolution. So guys, thank yous for watching, and be sure to have a good one. I'll probably do some videos like this soon. Yeah. See you there, guys.
I was having my shield up! How?
Party shields.